The whole drama of life is unique. Right? The Bible is one of the most fascinating books to read because it is so unique in its presentation. One story says, God and Satan were chatting away one day. Now, see, I wouldn't have thought that. Isn't that unique? And they're chatting away, and looking down on what's going on the earth. Now, see, that's unique. I thought, how often do they get together and chat and talk about all this stuff? I don't know. But the drama of the story is absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's unique. And on this particular occasion, the story says, God got to bragging about one of his favorite people, Job. And he got to saying, Job, he's my favorite friend. Job, he's the greatest, he's the richest, he's the most powerful, and I'm taking good care of my friend Job. And he kept saying, Job. And finally, Satan got it up to here with Job. And he said, yeah, God, Job, your special friend. You've got this wall built around him. I can't get to him in my normal fashion. And God said, well, he's a special friend of mine. Right? We got this thing going. So I'm taking good care of him. Now, this conversation is going on. I find that fascinating. I find it unique. And finally, in the scenario of the story, Satan says to God, I tell you what, God, if you were to take that special wall of protection down from around your special friend, and if you were to let me at him, I promise you in a short period of time, doing my specialty, he will curse you to your face and then die. God said, you're out of your mind. He would never do that. Not my special friend. Satan said, would you like to wager? Wow. Isn't that fascinating? God says, interesting question. I wonder what Job would do. Now, see, Job doesn't know this is going on. Isn't that fascinating? That's a fascinating story. Finally, according to the scenario of the story, unbelievable, God went for the bet. And he had just one requirement. He said, just one thing. Satan said, what's that? God said, well, you can't kill him. Because he's my special friend. Satan said, okay, I don't need to kill him. But you just take the wall down, let me do my number, and I promise you he will curse you. God said, no way. Satan said, I will do it. And the bet is on. Isn't that fascinating? That's fascinating. According to the terms of the wager, God did as he was required by the wager, and he took the wall down from around his special friend. And when he did, according to the story, Satan did one of his all-time famous numbers on the man. First, took his family. Second, took his wealth, destroyed him. And blow 3, took his health. That's called triple blow. Your family, your fortune, and your health. In one of the last scenes, Job is sitting on the ashes with everything gone, and he is scraping his sores with a rock. And his wife comes along, and she's observed all of this scenario, God forsaking his special friend Job. And she said to Job, it looks like your friend has forsaken you. Why don't you just curse him and die? Satan said to God, here's where it happens. God says, he hasn't talked yet. Isn't that fascinating? That's fascinating. While they both watch, wondering the outcome of this wager, Job says, from his ashes, never. I will never curse my friend. God said, I knew it. I knew it. And he picks up the bet. 10-1 or whatever it was. I don't know. It doesn't say what the wager was. Isn't that fascinating? Now, the rest of the story says God did make it up to his friend, Job. And when you play these kind of games, you do have to make it up. Let's see, what shall I do? I know what I'll do. I'll just give Job twice of everything he had before. Wow. And Job became, according to history, one of the richest, most powerful men in the known world. But isn't that a fascinating scenario? Don't you find that fascinating? Now, it may be a bit frustrating, but we learn to turn frustration into fascination, right? And you just give up on a lot of this trying to figure it out and say, that's one of those things. It's a fascinating thing. I used to say, liars shouldn't lie. See, we call that wasted energy. Why would you deal in such Mickey Mouse pronouncements, right? Liars are supposed to lie. That's what they're supposed to do. That's why we call them liars. Lie. You wouldn't expect them to do anything else. Lie to say, liars shouldn't lie. We call you naive. And we especially call you naive if it upsets you, instead of finding it fascinating. Right? Somebody cuts you off on the freeway. You go chasing them down the freeway and shaking your fist. Hey, save yourself. They say they shouldn't cut you off on the freeway. Hey, hold on, hold on. That's what they're supposed to do. They're known as cutter-offers on the freeway. And if you say, those people shouldn't cut you off, we call you naive, naive. Come on. Here's some stuff that saved me a lot of agony and a lot of anguish and a lot of sleepless nights I used to go through and pulling my hair and wondering. I gave up on all that when I finally understood the 80-20 rule. Let me give some good clues on the 80-20 rule. As a leader, as a manager, being able to influence other people in this 80-20 group, here are some clues. Learn to spend 80% of your time as a leader with the 20%. For maximum efficiency and productivity, this is part of the key. Since it's going to be 80-20, and there's plenty of examples to show that it's 80-20, not exactly, but fairly close. Ask the minister of the church, who picks up the tab here? And he'll say, probably, 20% of the people pick up 80% of the tab. I mean, this is called one of those things, okay? So what do? Well, you learn to work with it and not try to solve it. It's like trying to solve the seasons. You don't solve the seasons, you learn to work with the seasons. They're all set. And some of these things by history are all set. The key is to learn to work with the way it is set. So part of the key of leadership is learning to spend 80% of your time with the 20% because they're doing the 80%. We would call that good leadership sense. Now you say, well, how do you do that? Let me give you part of the answer in how to do that. Here it is. Spend individual time with the 20% and group time with the 80%. This is part of the answer to leadership skills. However, guess who wants your individual time? The wrong group. But that's what life's all about, right? Accepting this challenge. So now you've got to be what we call clever. And you've got to be, another key word, diplomatic. Diplomacy and strategy are two key words for leadership to understand. Diplomacy and strategy. Here's part of the diplomacy. Mary comes and says, I've got a question. You say, Mary, bring your question Saturday morning. I'm going to meet with everybody, and I'll cover it then. She says, okay. Now, it might not be that easy. But if you start trying to put this in perspective now, groups, you can deal with the 80% by groups, and you can talk to the 20% individual. Now, the pull is in the opposite direction, and it always is. Gravity is the downward pull. Life is the struggle in the opposite direction of gravity. It's downward pull. Life is moving in the opposite direction of the normal negative. Now somebody says, well, I'll just fire the 80%. They're only doing 20% of the business. Well, I wouldn't fool with that. Because after you've fired the 80%, before too long, whoever is left, 20% of them will be doing 80% of the business, and 80% will be doing 20%. Right? This is not something you fire. This is something you learn to work with. The 80-20 rule, very important rule. Now, let me give you some other clues to understanding ratios and numbers, categories in this challenge of leadership. The next subject is called the law of averages. The law of averages. So important to understand the law of averages. The law of averages in a personal sense is very simple. Here's what it says. If you do something often enough, you'll get a ratio of results. It's important for leaders to understand ratios. Because if you're working with people, you got to have some charts. You got to know ratios. You got to be able to evaluate your own performance, their performance. Ratios. What do we mean by ratios? Well, let's say you're in sales, you join a company and you start representing the product or the service. And you're first getting started, you talk to 10 people. 9 say, no, I wouldn't care for any. 1 says, yes, I'll take some. We call this your opening ratio. Now, 1 out of 10, it all depends on what you're involved with, whether or not that's a good ratio or a poor ratio. You say, well, that's not too good a ratio. Well, it all depends. Okay? But it's your opening ratio. So at first, you don't worry about what the numbers are. At first, you just get some activity going. Now, we call this very simply 1 out of 10. Now, here's what's very exciting about dealing in ratios. Once a ratio starts, it tends to continue. Now, this is some things leadership needs to know so that you're not frustrated. If you talk to 10 people, 1 says yes. If you talk to 10 more, chances excellent, you'll get another one. If you talk to 10 more, chances excellent, you'll get another one. It's uncanny. I don't even know how it works. All I know is it works. There's a lot of things you don't need to know how they work. Just work them. Right? A lot of people are studying the roots. Others are gathering the fruit. I mean, it depends on what end of this you want to get in on. It just works. It's a fascinating subject, the law of averages. Okay? Now, once you know that your ratio pretty well is in there, 1 out of 10, now you can start to compete. It is so important to compete, to test your skill against someone else's skill. What someone else can do is a pretty good insight in if you stretch what you might be able to do. So competition is a very healthy thing. Now, you've got to be very smart here. If you've been with this company, let's say a long time, and you've been there so long, you're so good, you can get 9 out of 10, and I just joined and I can only get 1 out of 10, if we have a 30-day contest as to who can get the most to say yes to our product or service, if we have a 30-day contest, you and me, even though I can only get 1 out of 10, I will win. You say, well, I've been here a long time, I can get 9 out of 10. How could you possibly beat me? It would be very simple. Now, it might not be easy, but it would be very simple. During the 30 days, since I understand now these ratios, during the month, while you talk to 10 and get 9, I will talk to 100 and get 10. So that at the end of 30 days, you got 9, I got 10, I beat you. Isn't that clever? Let me give you a scenario here. If you're bright, what you do if you're new, you make up in numbers what you lack in skill. This is called helping people with the numbers, helping people with ratios. Someone says, well, I can only get 1 out of 10. Say, that's got nothing to do with competition. Now, after 30 days, I may be fairly exhausted. But see, I'm pretty good for a 30-day run. One is I don't sleep much for 30 days. About 4 hours sleep is all I need. For 30 days. Now, I got to back off after 30 days, I'll admit that. But for 30 days, I can go on 4 hours sleep. Now, see, it's hard to beat somebody that won't sleep. How are you going to beat somebody? About 1 hour a day for nutrition. That's all I need. 1 meal a day, 1 hour a day for nutrition. In 30 days, how are you going to beat somebody that won't eat? Won't eat, won't sleep. The answer is, it's hard. It's hard, even if they're new. But if the new person is so clever to make up in numbers what they first lack in skill, I'm telling you, you can compete even though you're new. The key is to be bright enough to understand ratios. Here's the next clue. Ratios can be increased. You talk to 10, get 1, talk to 10, get 1, talk to 10, get 1, talk to 10 more, get 2. Why would about the 4th time you talk to 10, you get 2 instead of 1? You're getting better. Key question, who can get better? Answer, anybody who tries. All you got to do is put together the numbers. Right? Your brain is as good as anybody else's. Your chances are as good. All you got to do is find a way to put out the extraordinary effort to do an ordinary thing extremely well. Ratios. Success is a numbers game. It's important to keep track of your numbers. In baseball, we call it batting average. Whatever you're doing, the key is to keep track of your success and how good you are at whatever. Someone says, well, I'm not very good on the telephone. I'll tell you how you can quickly cure all that, is get on the telephone. I'm telling you, you can get better at anything. All you've got to do is attempt it and try it and start putting a string of numbers together and keeping track and understand your own ratios. I teach a very simple sales course. Let me give it to you in 3 points. Number 1, talk to lots of people every day. It's a simple sales course. Number 1, talk to lots of people. Isn't that simple? It's a numbers game, especially if you're new. And here's what's exciting. There's lots of people. You don't have to worry about people. So just talk to lots of people, even if your presentation is very poor. If you put the numbers together, I'm telling you, something will happen. If your presentation was so poor, you went around every day saying to everybody you could meet, you wouldn't want to buy anything, would you? Sure enough, somebody's going to say, well, maybe I would. What are you selling? I'm telling you, it's just about that simple. If you put the numbers together, if you talk to lots of people every day, 2 things will happen. Number 1, you're bound to make sales. I'm telling you, some people buy for the strangest reasons. Hey, some people buy out of sympathy for the salesperson. I'm telling you, you can find some people that'll buy out of sympathy. They don't want to see your kids starve. I'm telling you, if you'll talk to enough people, some people will buy out of sympathy. So part of success is, look pitiful to enough people, right? I'm telling you, somebody will buy. And why? Why? It's because of ratios. It's because of numbers. Now, you can have a much better presentation than you wouldn't want to buy anything, would you? You can get a little brighter than that. But if you start just that simple, it's simple. Somebody says, where do you start? Anywhere. It doesn't matter. If you're in sales, walk outside, find you a rock, throw it up in the air. Wherever the rock comes down, start right there. That's a good place to start. Anywhere. The next person you see, say, sir, you're the first man after the rock. And that'll get a conversation started. I'm telling you. They may back up while they talk, but something will start. And the reason is understanding the numbers. The numbers, you don't have to be so cleverly skillful. All you got to do is be bright enough to understand that numbers can make up for lack of skill to begin with. And if you're in a leadership position to help people, help them with their ratios. Say, John, let's go over these numbers one more time. How many calls? Who did you talk to? Okay. So that's my sales form. It's very simple. Number 1, talk to lots of people every day. You're bound to get better. You're bound to find somebody. Number 2, be real nice. When the weather isn't, be real nice when people aren't. A big part of presentation is attitude, personality. And 3rd is simple. Give good service. Write all the notes most people don't write. Do all the extra things most people don't do. Call them before they call you. Service leads to multiple sales. If you'll take good care of somebody, they'll open doors you could never open yourself. They'll take you by the hand and share you with people that you never thought you could reach. Service leads to the multiples. That's a simple sales course. But it starts with numbers, understanding ratios. Our next subject for the study of skills in leadership. It's a simple story, it comes from the Bible. Now, being an amateur, you sort of have to take my way of putting it. But my parents made sure by the time I was about 19, I was a pretty good scholar, but I'm still an amateur. But there's a unique story in the Bible. It's called the parable of the story of the sower. S-O-W-E-R. The sower in the ancient days was the person that planted the crops. Very simply, they got the ground ready, and the sower with a bag of seed would walk across the ground, sow the seed. That's how they got the crops going. And it's a very fascinating story, and it's got a lot to say, and it's got a lot to say about our subject called the law of averages. There's some important points you'll pick up right away when you read the story. Here's number 1. The sower was a wise man. A great advantage. Right? They didn't send a dummy out to plant. Number 2, he was very ambitious. And by the time you finish the story, you'll come to the conclusion he was ambitious. Admirable quality. Ambition. Now that has to be tempered. One writer said, I've learned to be both ambitious and content. That's a unique place to finally arrive, to be both ambitious and content. But this story says the sower was very ambitious. Nothing wrong with ambition, as long as you work the right formula. The Bible probably gives the greatest formula for wealth and power. It says, be faithful over small amounts and we'll make you ruler over much. Good philosophy. Which teaches us, number one, I think it's okay to wish to be a ruler. Nothing wrong with that. But here's how you become a ruler. Good stewardship when the amounts are small. The guy says, oh, if I had a fortune, I'd take good care of it, but I've just got a paycheck, so I don't know where it goes. I say, no. When we really check your faithfulness is when the amounts are small. I said to Mr. Schoaf when I met him at age 25, I said, you know, if I had more money, I'd have a better plan. He said, Mr. Rohn, I would suggest to you if you had a better plan, you'd have more money. It's not the amount that counts. It's the philosophy that executes your plan that counts. If a child has $1, what should he do with it? It's very important. It's going to determine the rest of his life, what he does with $1. You say, well, it's just a child and it's just $1. We call that massive errors in judgment. It's only a child and it's only $1. What a colossal mistake to make in analyzing. If a child is allowed to spend the whole dollar and they don't have the sense of where that could take them, we call that the greatest disservice to a child. Not to explain to them the journey and the road you select when you spend the whole dollar. So if a child wants to spend the whole dollar, you say, no, you can't spend the whole dollar. Child says, why not? Say, well, let me show you why not. And you take him to the other side of town. And say, would you like to live here? Here's where the people live that spend all they make. Here's where they live. There's nothing better than visual to illustrate to a child. Show them the tragic circumstances if you spend all you make, if you spend all you've got. And kids will come home with their big wide eyes. Say, would you like to live here? Would you like to live like this? Kid says, no, I wouldn't want to live here. Then you can't spend the whole dollar. Okay, back to my story. The sower was bright and he was also ambitious. Number 3, he went to work. It takes activity to furnish the labor that brings new life. Ideas without labor are stillborn. They never become tangible. They never become real. You got to put yourself through the activity, through the labor. So when you read the story, you'll find this was a hard-working sower. We call that admirable quality. Now, some interesting things that happened to the sower. It said he had excellent seed, point 4. He had the best. At least the scenario of the story says he had the best of seed. Boy, it's exciting when you feel that you're involved in the best product, the best service, the best idea, the best enterprise, something you feel proud about. Okay. But that's important, to have what you consider the best. Now, with all of these qualities, he starts out and now starts to unfold the scenario of life called the law of averages. Here's what happened. The sower goes out to sow the seed, and the first part of the seed that he sows falls by the wayside, and the birds get it. Now, I want you to understand the scenario. Here's what's very important for leaders to engage in, to teach the inevitable. It's very important to teach the inevitable. Key for leadership. Leaders must understand birds. Why? Birds are going to get part of the seed. It's called inevitable. And if you don't teach inevitability, people will be all upset. They won't know what to expect. We must all be prepared for what we call eventualities, the inevitable. So here's part of the scenario. The sower goes out to sow the seed, and the birds get some. He sows some more seed, and the birds get it. Now, this is a typical story of life. Is that fairly typical? Fairly typical. The birds are going to get some of the seed. Some of you building an organization, right? You're out recruiting. Say, John, I've got an important story for you to listen to. Could be the change of your life, earn some extra money, or make it a full-time venture, whatever. But come and take a look. And he says, well, I think I'm ready for something like that. Thursday night, I'll see you, and let's go through it all. You say, wonderful. Comes Thursday night. John isn't there. You say, where is John? The birds. The birds. The birds. Who knows what form they come in? I don't know. It's called the inevitable. The inevitable. His brother-in-law said, sales? You're not going to get mixed up in sales. Who told you you were a salesman? All kinds of stuff that talk people out of a good idea. I don't know. Now, when the birds get some of the seed, you got one of a couple of choices. Number one, you can chase birds. You say, well, I'll go straighten this out. Well, here's the problem if you go try chasing birds to straighten things out. You have now left the field. And the law of averages isn't going to work for you anymore till you get back to the field. This is so important to know. What to spend your time on and what not to waste your time on. There's two ways to have the tallest building in town. One is tear all the other buildings down. Right? Now yours is the tallest. But we call that the hardest of tasks. Right? You might get the first one down, right? The guy's gone. You got his building down. The next one, right? Maybe not be that difficult. But about the third building you start for, a guy standing out in front. And he says, I've heard about you. Formidable, right? Now you got some problems because you're not known as a builder. You're known as a wrecker, a destroyer. You put everything down to try to make you look good. We call that massive errors in judgment. The best thing to do is to spend your energy and time on the things that count and understand the law of averages. Okay? And not chase the birds, but to stay in the field. Here's what it said the wise man did. He ignored the birds, and he kept on sowing. Why? He was so bright, he understood the law of averages. Now, here was some more of his experiences. Now he keeps on sowing the seed. Now the seed falls on rocky ground, and the soil was shallow. We call this inevitable. I don't know how to miss this. This is called the stuff of life. It's so important to understand the seasons and the stuff of life and the ratios and the inevitables. This is so important, especially as a leader, so that you can help people through understanding how it is. This is called one of those things. And it said this time the seed takes root and the little plant starts to grow, but the soil is so shallow that the first hot day, the little plants wither and die. You say, wow, what a disappointment. Well, sure, you're going to be disappointed. Some people are going to try so little, even if you've got a good idea. 30 days later, you say, we had this meeting, John wasn't here. So where is John? I said, I don't know. You say, well, I thought sure John would last 30 days. But he didn't. Why? It's called inevitable. Right? And who knows the reason why? John isn't here anymore. Somebody said, boo. And he quit. He quit. First hot day. Now, you're going to be disappointed, especially if it's somebody you like, somebody you know. But here's what you must learn to do as a leader. Discipline your disappointment. This is part of the challenge of life, disciplining the disappointment. Understanding the law of averages. Now, here's what it said the wise man did. He kept on sowing. How brilliant. He was so well schooled in the law of averages. Now he keeps on sowing, and this time the seed falls on thorny ground. You say, well, how much of this ground can you get? Well, just hang on. It's not the end of the story. Now this time he sows the seed, it falls on thorny ground, and the little plant starts to grow, but the thorns choke it to death, and it dies. Wow, what's this called? The inevitable. Do you know what the story called the thorns? The cares of life, little cares. Who knows the excuses some people use for not pushing on through and getting the job done? It's called inevitable. Some people are going to try so little. They're going to let other things crowd out the good opportunities. And who knows why? I don't know why. I'm an amateur on this stuff. The key is to take the inevitable and take the obvious, right? Everybody should take obvious 1, obvious 2. Right? Study the obvious and not let it unduly disturb you, and learn to manage the obvious so you can get on with the more important things in life. Who knows? I called John up. I said, John, where were you last night? We had this meeting. John says, well, I can't make every meeting. I say, why not? John says, well, I got a lot of other things I got to do. I say, what are they? You won't believe the list John gave me. The backyard fence was sagging, and the dogs are about to get loose. You just can't let your dogs run loose. I say, okay, John. John says, the screen door came off the hinges. And you just can't let things fall apart. You got to take time, keep things fixed up. I said, okay, John. Some extra trash had piled up in the garage. You just can't let mountains of trash take over. You got to take care of your trash. I said, okay, John. On the phone, I can hear the thorns going. Some people have the incredible ability to major in minor things. I don't know why. We call this inevitable. We call it a mystery. It's part of the scenario of life. I'm driving through the little community. John's out there mowing his lawn. He's cussing the weeds, and he's red in the face, and he's about to explode. I said, John, what are you doing? He says, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm mowing this lousy lawn. I said, John, there's all kinds of little neighborhood boys around here. Mow your lawn. He says, they want $5. I'll mow it myself. I'll mow it myself. I said, okay, John, okay. Number one, there should be a law against cheating some little neighborhood boy out of $5. Now, why the scenario? The scenario of the story of the sower is to prepare us for the inevitable called the law of averages. Now, here's what it says. The sower kept on sowing. He was so bright, evidently he'd been schooled in these numbers of about how many are going to let the birds, and about how many the hot weather's going to take, and about how many are going to let little things cheat him out of big chances. Right? He must have gone through the school because he understood. He kept on sowing. Now here's what it says. The seed falls on good ground. Let me give you a promise as a leader. It always will. Key phrase. If you share a good idea often enough, it'll fall on good people. Why? The law of averages. Now, even the good ground had a variety of productivity. It said part of the good ground produced 30%. Wow. And it said part of the good ground produced 60%. Terrific. And it said part of the good ground produced 100%. What's that called? The law of averages. That's the way it is. It's called one of those things. Now, can you find some 100%ers? The answer is yes, but you got to go through the birds and the hot weather and the thorns and cares, and you've got to find some way to use the 30%ers and the 60%ers. And if you become entrusted as a skillful leader and learn the law of averages and learn how to deal with all this, you'll have some 100%ers to deal with, to work with. The law of averages. As leaders, let's learn to help people not just with their jobs, but with their lives. I think we have a twofold responsibility to help people with job skills. But I think the greater responsibility is to help people with life skills. Let's don't just teach people how to work, let's teach people how to live. How to assimilate and accumulate. Far greater treasures than just a paycheck. The treasures of awareness, understanding, setting goals, reaching into the future, growing, changing, expanding. Let's talk about team building. Understanding now in some of this background, the law of averages, let me give you, I think, what are some good scenarios to understand about putting a good team together, looking for good people. If you want to build a championship team, that's quite a challenge. How to build a successful team of people to accomplish some purpose. If you've got something in mind, whether it's enterprise or organization or whether it's church or whether it's sports, doesn't matter what it is. If you want to find good people, here's part of the challenge in finding a successful team of people. Jesus had the same purpose, right? And you can't hit them all. Jesus says, I'll take you. And that was Judas. I mean, you can't hit them all. Anyway. To put together a good team, I've got a checklist for you. It's got 4 parts to it. Here's number 1, history. It's not a bad idea to check history. Somebody's qualifications to do the job, Just take a look. Now, we can't go into too much detail on any one of these, but let me just give you the list. Number 2, check interest. If somebody's interested, they're probably a good prospect. Now, sometimes people can fake their interest. But if you've been a leader for a while, you can be a pretty good judge of whether or not somebody is faking you out on what we call true interest. And you just have to have some face-to-face conversation just to check out to the best of your ability. You won't hit it every time, but you can get pretty good at checking what we call true interest. A group came to Jesus one day and said, "We wish to be disciples." He said, "Gentlemen, you've put your story on the wrong man." They said, "Wow." He said, "Unfortunately, I can read your heart." They said, "Oh." They didn't want to be disciples. They had all kinds of trickery in mind. But he picked up on it right away. And he wasn't faked out by the "we wish to be." Now, you might not get quite this good at reading hearts, but I'm telling you, you can get pretty good as a leader in judging somebody's what we call true interest. Here's the third part of the checklist. Check response. Response tells you a lot about someone's integrity and character and interest and skill. If someone says, "You have to get there how early?" "You have to stay how late?" "The break is only 10 minutes. 2 evenings a week. Saturdays." That give you any clues? These are called clues, right? Don't go past these clues. Clues on what we call response. A person's response quickly illustrates their philosophy. We only respond based on what we know, and our attitude and philosophy is so bound up. And we might, be clever for a while, but pretty soon response is going to come truly from our philosophy. And if there's any great errors there in philosophy and attitude, here's one of the places where it shows up in response. And here's the last piece of the checklist in putting together a good team. Check results. Finally, the name of the game is results.